On my 60th birthday, I opened the door to a crowd, but it wasn't a party. My son stood there holding a sign. "Congrats to the new owner." Behind him, a truck unloading my furniture. "You signed the papers," he said. I just smiled. I knew this day would come, and I brought my own surprise. I didn't stay silent. "Yes, I did sign them, didn't I?" I replied, my voice steady despite the chill running down my spine. Brian's smile, so much like his father's, didn't reach his eyes. Those cold blue eyes that once looked up at me with childish wonder now assessed me like I was nothing but a hurdle finally cleared. The movers continued unloading my life's possessions onto the sidewalk. My neighbor, Susan Lane, peeked through her curtains across the street. I gave her a small wave and she disappeared from view. I'd already packed a small suitcase that morning, clothes, toiletries, and a locked wooden box containing everything I needed for what would come next. "The retirement community has your room ready," Brian said, checking his watch. "We should get going. Ashley's waiting in the car with the kids." Ashley, my daughter-in-law, sat in their gleaming SUV, not bothering to step out. She gave me a rehearsed smile and a practiced wave through the window. Lucas and Emily, my grandchildren, were absorbed in their tablets, unaware of the significance of this day. "Let me just grab my purse," I said, stepping back inside the house I'd lived in for 35 years. The moment the door shut behind me, the noise of the outside world dulled. For a brief second, I stood in the quiet, letting the weight of what was happening settle on my shoulders. My eyes wandered around the living room, still warm from the sun that had filtered through the windows that morning, still holding the faint scent of vanilla and cinnamon from the birthday cake I had foolishly baked for myself. I had told myself it was just for fun, that maybe the kids would like it if they dropped by, but really, a piece of me had hoped that Brian and Ashley would come with smiles, not smirks, with balloons, not a moving truck. I crossed the floor slowly, every step heavy with memory. My hand brushed over the old oak dining table. The finish was worn down at the corners, not from age, but from life, from homework assignments spread out like wildflowers, from birthday candles and Thanksgiving dinners, from the time Brian spilled an entire bowl of chili in 5th grade and cried like the world had ended, and now he was ending mine. I walked into the hallway, the wooden floor creaking in familiar protest. I glanced into Brian's old room. The posters were long gone, but the echo of his laughter remained, of me reading him to sleep on stormy nights, of the late-night talks when he came home heartbroken from his first breakup. Back in my bedroom, I reached for my purse sitting neatly on the dresser. Next to it, the small, worn suitcase I had packed at dawn, as though some part of me knew today wouldn't be filled with candles and hugs, but with boxes and betrayal. I knelt beside the suitcase and opened it one last time. Inside was everything I truly needed: 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, my reading glasses, and the old mahogany box with a broken clasp. That box held documents, evidence, letters, even a photograph of Brian at 5 years old, the boy I once knew, the boy I had raised with love, with hope, with everything. Standing up, I took a deep breath. I looked around the room one final time, the curtains I had sewn myself, the framed cross-stitch of our family name, the wedding photo of me and Charles White long before the love soured and he walked away, leaving Brian and me to fend for ourselves. 35 years of love, labor, and loss under this roof, and now it wasn't mine anymore. I closed the suitcase, grabbed my purse, and returned to the door. The rest of my belongings would be sold or discarded. I knew Brian had made it clear the retirement homerooms were cozy, his euphemism for cramped. I walked down the hall toward the front door, the suitcase in one hand, my purse draped over my shoulder. Every footstep sounded final, like a closing chapter. The family portraits lining the wall watched me pass in silence. There was Brian in kindergarten, missing his 2 front teeth, Brian in high school, holding up his graduation cap, Brian on his wedding day, standing beside Ashley, both of them radiant and young. I stopped in front of one photo, me and Brian, taken when he was 9. We were at the park, and he had his arms around my neck his smile wide and unburdened. I touched the glass lightly with my fingertips, whispering, "Where did you go, sweetheart?" As I opened the door, the sound of boxes being unloaded greeted me like thunder. Movers barked instructions, and Brian stood nearby with his phone out, already checking emails. He didn't even glance at me. "Ready, Mom," he said, without looking up. I stepped outside and took in the full scene. The moving truck was nearly empty now. My sofa stood on the curb, wrapped in plastic. My lamp, the one I used to read beside every night, was perched awkwardly next to it like a lost sentinel. Even the rose bushes I had nursed back to life last spring trembled in the breeze, as if they too were being abandoned. "Yes, dear," I said, my voice low but even. "Let's not keep Ashley waiting." Brian opened the back door of the gleaming SUV for me. I climbed in slowly, the leather cold beneath me. Ashley turned briefly in the driver's seat and offered a tight smile, her red lipstick untouched, pristine, rehearsed. "Hey, Diana, the kids are watching a movie. Hope you don't mind," she said. Mind? I wanted to laugh. They weren't even aware their grandmother's entire life had just been boxed up like leftovers. In the back seat beside me, my grandson Lucas had his headphones in, eyes locked on his tablet. Emily, my granddaughter, barely glanced up before going back to her game. No one said, "Happy birthday." The SUV pulled away from the house, from the garden I'd poured my soul into, from the porch where I'd once rocked Brian to sleep when he had night terrors, whispering lullabies until dawn. And now I was being driven away from it like some old suitcase full of expired clothes, unwanted, inconvenient, disposable. Brian tried small talk about the weather, about how nice the facility was supposed to be, about how this was really for the best. Brian rambled on from the passenger seat, trying to fill the silence with meaningless words. "Sunny Pines has a gardening club, Mom. You've always liked plants, right? They say there's even a little koi pond in the courtyard, and the food's supposed to be really good, like restaurant level." He chuckled, clearly nervous, clearly trying to convince himself more than me. I looked out the window at the houses passing by, neatly trimmed lawns, American flags fluttering in the breeze, and front porches where families gathered in rocking chairs. 1,000 memories passed me by. I remembered riding my bike down these streets as a girl. I remembered walking Brian to school in the rain, holding his hand tightly as he skipped over puddles. I didn't respond to him. What was there to say? In the driver's seat, Ashley adjusted the radio and tapped her manicured nails against the steering wheel. The activities director said they do themed dinners on holidays. They dress up and everything. It'll be fun. She smiled at me in the mirror. "They're doing Thanksgiving early this year. Maybe you can bring your famous pecan pie recipe." My throat tightened. They were speaking as if they were doing me a favor, as if exile was a gift. They wanted me to believe that this wasn't abandonment, it was help, love, care. But deep down, I knew the truth. They had stripped me of everything under the mask of kindness. They didn't want me around, not in their home, not in their lives. I had outlived my usefulness. We turned into the long, winding driveway of Sunny Pines. The building emerged from behind a cluster of birch trees, 2 stories of gray brick, a circular driveway, and a neatly clipped lawn that looked too pristine to be real. A small American flag hung by the front door, flapping softly in the wind. The place looked more like a clinic than a home. As we pulled up, an elderly man with a walker shuffled across the front entrance, his expression distant, his gaze vacant. Beside him, a nurse guided a woman in a wheelchair, her blanket slipping from her lap. The air smelled faintly of bleach and wilted roses. "This is it," Brian said, a little too cheerfully. He jumped out of the car and opened my door. I stepped out slowly, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other holding my small suitcase. Ashley got out too, smoothing her dress and ad Lucas her designer sunglasses. "The manager, Mrs. Chambers, should be waiting. We spoke to her last week. Everything's ready." Brian turned to me, smiling as if we were checking into a resort. "You'll be fine, Mom. Really, it's not forever. Not forever." I looked up at the beige walls of Sunny Pines, and for a moment I swore they leaned in around me, like a mausoleum waiting for its next resident. The facility director, Mrs. Chambers, greeted us with practiced warmth. She stepped out into the circular lobby with a clipboard in one hand and a saccharine smile fixed on her powdered face. "Mrs. Eleanor Price, welcome to Sunny Pines. We're so delighted to have you join our little community." Delighted. That word sat bitterly on my tongue. It was the same word they used when someone donated an organ or when a neighbor finally moved away after years of feuding. It wasn't joy. It was relief. I nodded politely, but I could feel the tremor in my fingers. Whether from nerves or anger, I couldn't tell. Mrs. Chambers led us through a long, carpeted corridor with wall sconces that gave off a dim, flickering glow. "We have bingo every Tuesday and Thursday, live music in the common area on weekends, a shuttle that goes to the mall once a week. You'll never be bored here." She said it with such conviction, as if not being bored was the highlight of growing old and being discarded. As we walked, we passed open doors. Behind each one sat someone who had been loved once, men and women who had danced, laughed, raised children, survived wars, and cooked Sunday dinners. Now they sat alone, staring at the television or the wall like forgotten pages in a book no one wanted to read anymore. Mrs. Chambers gestured to a small room near the end of the hallway. "This is yours, dear. Room 208. I stepped inside. It was beige. Beige walls, beige curtains, beige carpet, a twin bed with hospital corners, a single nightstand, a narrow dresser, one chair by the window, which overlooked the back parking lot where garbage bins stood like sentinels of abandonment." "This is cozy," Brian said quickly, trying to fill the silence. Ashley stayed by the door, arms folded. "It's better than most retirement homes. It's clean. It's safe. You'll be fine here, Eleanor." "Perfect," I said with a nod, forcing the words through the tightness in my throat. "Just perfect." I set my small suitcase on the bed and slowly sat down beside it. I ran my hand over the cheap cotton blanket, feeling the scratchy fabric beneath my fingertips. There was no warmth here, no history, no comfort, just a sterilized attempt at pretending life still happened between these four beige walls. "Well," Brian cleared his throat, "we should probably get going. The kids have soccer and Ashley has that appointment," Ashley chimed in. "We'll visit soon, maybe next weekend." I turned toward them. Brian looked relieved, as if he'd completed some grueling task. Ashley glanced at her phone, already half checked out. He bent down and gave me a quick, stiff hug. "This is for the best, Mom. The house was getting to be too much for you." I looked up at him. "I understand." And I did. Oh, I understood perfectly. I understood that the house, the one I paid off with overtime shifts and missed vacations, was now his. I understood that this room was not a gift, but a sentence. And I understood that my role in his life had finally expired. Ashley gave me a quick, stiff hug. "We'll visit soon," she promised. Another lie to add to the pile. I nodded, but said nothing. I knew what soon meant. It was the kind of word people used when they didn't want to commit, didn't want to feel guilty for walking away. Soon was the cousin of someday, and both were relatives of never. Brian lingered for a moment longer, looking around the room as though trying to reassure himself this was acceptable, that this was kindness, not betrayal. "You'll be comfortable here, Mom. Really." I smiled for his sake, the same way I'd smiled when he brought home a failing report card in 6th grade and cried in my arms. The same way I smiled through every heartbreak, every failure, every reckless choice he made, telling myself he would grow up, find his way. Now he had, and he had decided that way forward didn't include me. "I'll be fine, dear," I said gently, patting his hand. "Don't worry about a thing." He exhaled, relieved, and they both turned to leave. "Tell the children Grandma loves them," I added, "even if they're too busy to look up from their tablets." Ashley paused at the doorway. "Of course," she said, but didn't turn around. A moment later, the door clicked shut behind them. Silence. The kind of silence that doesn't cradle you, but chokes. I sat there for a moment, watching the slant of a late afternoon sun through the window. It filtered through dusty blinds and painted faded stripes on the carpet. The room smelled faintly of disinfectant and something else, something lonely, something forgotten. I stood slowly and walked to the window. Outside, I could see the SUV pulling away, the kids in the back seat oblivious, their faces lit up by their screens. Brian didn't look back. The car disappeared beyond the gates. I stood there for a long time, unmoving. Then I closed the blinds. The ride to Sunny Pines had been quiet. Now, the silence felt like a verdict. I opened my small suitcase and began placing my clothes into the dresser drawers one by one. Each fold of fabric whispered a memory. The cardigan I wore when Brian graduated high school, the silk scarf Richard had bought me on our 20th anniversary, the sweatshirt I wore every Sunday morning while baking cinnamon rolls for the kids, memories packed into cotton and wool, now reduced to a drawer in a retirement home. I reached the bottom of the suitcase and pulled out the wooden box. It was heavy, solid oak, with a brass latch that clicked satisfyingly when I opened it. Inside were my real valuables, not jewelry or heirlooms, but truth. Neatly arranged were documents Brian didn't know I'd kept, original property deeds, bank statements, notarized records, a thumb drive containing audio files, and a signed affidavit from Harold Benson, my lawyer and old friend. Brian thought he'd won, but I hadn't stayed silent. Not this time. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed a number. "They've gone," I said when Susan answered. "Is everything ready?" Her voice was calm and certain, just as it had always been, even back when we were teaching together 3 decades ago at the old Lincoln Elementary. "Everything's ready, Eleanor. Harold's on standby with all the documentation. The copies are secure in his office, and I've already handed a duplicate set to Detective Monroe. We're just waiting for your word." "Good," I said, pacing slowly across the carpeted floor of my cramped new room. "I want this done right." Susan hesitated. "Are you sure, Ellie? This will be public, painful. It'll get ugly. Once we move forward, there's no taking it back." I looked out the window. The SUV was gone now. In its place was only a faded handicapped parking spot and a small bench beneath a drooping tree that looked as tired as I felt. But inside me, something very different stirred. Resolve. Not bitterness, not vengeance. Just the steady strength that rises in a woman who has been stepped on one too many times. "I'm more sure than I've ever been," I said firmly. "I gave them everything. They took more than what was offered. That ends today." Susan's voice softened. "Then let's finish this." I ended the call, then turned back to the wooden box on my bed. Slowly, carefully, I began reviewing its contents again, each sheet of paper a testament to my awareness. For 2 years, I'd watched Brian with quiet eyes, documenting everything. The account transfers he thought I wouldn't notice, the forged signature on the refinance agreement, the power of attorney for medical emergencies that somehow became access to my retirement fund. And then there were the texts, screenshots I'd quietly taken from his borrowed laptop one evening, last spring, when he asked me to look up recipes for Lucas's birthday. He'd left his email open, a conversation with Ashley, his wife, detailing the exact timeline of getting me moved out, selling the house, and using the money to pay down their debt. There were even notes about hiring a private chef once they had extra room in the budget. Private chef. I let out a soft laugh, bitter but brief. 37 years I worked, teaching kids, tutoring after hours, running Saturday literacy programs. Richard and I built that home from scratch when we were still young and full of hope. After he passed, I kept it going. Roof repairs, taxes, everything. And now it was a line item on their spreadsheet. I closed the box gently and slid it beneath the bed. "More sure than I've ever been," I replied. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the beige walls. I stepped into the bathroom, washed my face, and stared into the mirror. My reflection didn't scare me anymore. Yes, there were lines. Yes, the hair was grayer than I remembered, but the woman staring back at me had endured. She'd survived heartbreak, single motherhood, loneliness, and now betrayal, and she was still standing. I dried my face and returned to the bed, sitting on its edge. Outside, the hallway buzzed faintly with the sounds of evening medications and nurses' shoes squeaking against vinyl. A woman somewhere down the hall was coughing, another was laughing loudly, perhaps at a joke from a visitor or a memory that had come back sweet. I had no visitors, no more illusions either, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel broken by that. I picked up the notebook I kept in my purse, the one where I scribbled everything from shopping lists to old recipes and memories of Richard. Tonight, I opened to a fresh page and wrote just one sentence. He may have taken the house, but I never gave him permission to steal my story. I placed everything back in the box and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. For 30 years, I'd given everything for my son. I'd missed opportunities, relationships, dreams, all to make sure he had every advantage, and this was how he repaid me. But I wasn't going to let it end like this. I closed my eyes, but sleep refused to come. Instead, memories came, vivid, uninvited, like guests overstaying their welcome. The night Brian was born during a snowstorm, Richard pacing in the hallway with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, panicked yet proud. Brian's first day of school, crying at the classroom door, then turning to wave at me through the glass with a trembling smile. His high school graduation, when he hugged me too tightly and whispered, "We did it, Mom." We. I always thought that meant we were a team, that I was raising a son who would one day become a man who loved not just himself, but others, with depth and honor. But somewhere between college applications and car loans, I became less of a person and more of a resource to him, a faucet of comfort, money, and attention. One that, in his mind, could be turned off and wheeled away when it no longer suited his plans. Still, even now, as my heart ached and my back rested against a bed that wasn't mine, I didn't hate him. What I felt was grief, the slow, smothering grief of realizing that the child I raised, the one who once made me macaroni necklaces and whispered, "I love you more than pancakes," no longer existed. He'd been replaced by someone else, someone who calculated the value of a birthday card in market terms, who looked at his mother and saw equity, not love. I took a slow breath and exhaled all of it. Tomorrow I'd rise. The thought should have made me sad, should have broken my heart. Instead, I felt something else stirring inside me, something I hadn't felt in decades. Power. And it wasn't the loud, boastful kind of power. It was quiet, solid, like the core of an old oak tree tested by storms, bent by wind, but never uprooted. I swung my legs off the bed and stood. The soles of my feet hit the cold linoleum with a steadiness that surprised me. I wasn't just an old woman tucked away in a retirement home. I was Eleanor Price, former teacher, widow of a good man, mother, yes, but not a fool. I walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. The parking lot was quiet now. A single moth flickered against the lamplight, drawn to something it didn't understand. I smiled at the metaphor. The sign Brian had so proudly held up that morning still echoed in my ears. "Congrats to the new owner." Well, I had a sign of my own now, one that wouldn't be made of cardboard or scrawled in Sharpie. Mine was going to be carved in court records, in legal documents, in restitution orders, and frozen accounts. Mine would say, "You underestimated the wrong woman." I didn't mourn. I simply planned. And somewhere deep inside, the young woman I used to be, fierce, unstoppable, unbroken, awakened from a long slumber. The next morning came with the mechanical clang of breakfast trays and the hollow hum of the news playing in the rec room. I sat with my coffee, barely sipping it, my mind already working through the next steps like chess pieces on a board. At 9 a.m. sharp, I called Harold Benson, my longtime lawyer and the man I trusted more than anyone outside my bloodline. His voice on the other end was warm, confident. "Morning, Eleanor. You ready?" I took a breath. I've never been more ready. "We'll meet you at 10 at the office. Bring the documents. Susan will pick you up." I hung up, packed the wooden box into a cloth bag, and changed into the navy blue dress I always saved for meetings and memorials, the ones where you needed to look strong even when your heart was splintering. As I pinned on my brooch, a silver sunflower, a gift from Richard on our 10th anniversary, I caught my reflection in the mirror. There were bags under my eyes, yes, wrinkles that told stories of laughter and stress, but beneath it all, I saw something I hadn't in years, a woman who had nothing left to lose, and that made her dangerous. I spent my first day observing the routines of the place, nodding politely at staff and residents alike. I ate the bland food, attended a mind-numbing bingo session, and smiled through a welcome orientation that felt more like prison processing than anything else. But it was all just a performance, a quiet act, because while the other residents had resigned themselves to this place, to the beige walls, the disinfectant smell, the forced smiles, I had not. I wasn't here to settle. I was here to prepare, to build my case, to get my life back. At 9:58, Susan Lane pulled up outside in her weathered green sedan, exactly on time. She stepped out with her usual determined gait, holding a large travel mug of coffee in one hand and her purse in the other. "Ready to burn the world down, Eleanor?" she asked, cracking the smallest grin. "Not burn it," I replied as I slid into the passenger seat. "Just rearrange it." She drove us to Harold Benson's law office downtown, a modest brownstone building tucked between an art supply store and a bakery that smelled of cinnamon and redemption. Harold, ever the gentleman, greeted me with a firm handshake and eyes full of concern. "You have everything?" he asked. I nodded, pulling the wooden box from my bag and placing it on his desk like a sacred offering. Inside were the copies of the fraudulent bank transfers, notarized statements, and something else. Something I hadn't told even Susan about, an audio recording. 2 months ago, Brian had called me from his office, asking me to consider signing a few emergency documents. I had recorded the call, suspecting something was off even then. In the recording, he clearly said, "It's just temporary, Mom. Just so I can move some funds through your account without the IRS raising questions. Don't worry, I'll pay it all back as soon as my next investment clears." Harold's eyebrows lifted as he played the file. "Perfect," he said. "This alone nails at least 2 counts of wire fraud and elder financial abuse." He flipped open a folder labeled Price versus Price, its contents thick with typed affidavits, timelines, and sworn statements. "We're filing 3 motions today," he continued. 1, to freeze all assets recently transferred from your name. 2, to initiate formal fraud charges. And 3, to file for a temporary restraining order. "And Brian doesn't know yet?" I asked. Harold shook his head. "Not yet. He'll be served at home in front of Ashley and the kids, just like he served you." I let out a slow breath. Good. That afternoon, Susan arrived with a basket of muffins and an envelope tucked inside her purse. We sat in the small garden area behind the building, far from prying ears. This garden was the only place in Sunny Pines that felt remotely alive. A couple of birds fluttered among the hedges. A lone bee buzzed lazily past, and under a crooked maple tree, we sat on a bench that smelled faintly of sun-warmed wood and memory. Susan handed me the envelope. "You were right," she whispered, "about everything." I opened it carefully. Inside were the bank records Harold Benson had uncovered. 3 secret accounts opened in my name. Mortgage paperwork showing that my house had been re-leveraged without my knowledge. Even a forged signature, mine, scanned onto a loan application for nearly $200,000. I stared at the pages, numb, my whole life reduced to transactions. "How long?" I asked. "At least 2 years. Maybe longer." I nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. "Did Harold Benson contact Detective Monroe?" Susan nodded. "She's waiting to meet you. Says your evidence is airtight." For a while, we just sat there, letting the silence say what words couldn't. Then Susan, sweet, practical Susan, reached into the basket and pulled out 2 blueberry muffins. She handed me one. "Eat, Eleanor. We're at war now. You'll need your strength." Did Harold Benson contact the detective? I asked, keeping my voice level despite the numbers swimming before my eyes. Susan nodded solemnly. Detective Karen Monroe. She's expecting us at the precinct tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. sharp. Said she's seen plenty of cases like this, but rarely with this much preparation. Eleanor, she's impressed. I closed the folder slowly and looked out over the garden, watching a squirrel scamper along the fence. 2 years ago, I might have cried, might have blamed myself, wondered where I went wrong, but not anymore. Now I knew better. Now I understood. People don't just change. They reveal who they really were all along. I'll be ready, I said. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay in bed at Sunny Pines, staring at the ceiling as the old radiator clanged in the wall like a tired heart refusing to quit. The silence was thick, but my mind buzzed with clarity. I wasn't just fighting for what had been taken from me. I was reclaiming something more sacred, my dignity. The boy I raised died a long time ago, Susan. I just didn't want to admit it. The next morning, I dressed in my navy blue coat, the one Brian had given me years ago for Mother's Day, before his ambition eclipsed his heart. I wore it not out of sentimentality, but as armor, a quiet symbol that I remembered who he used to be and who I would never be again. Detective Karen Monroe was waiting for us at the precinct, leaning against her desk, arms folded, mid-40s, hair in a tight bun, eyes sharp as glass. She didn't offer a handshake. She offered truth. Mrs. Price, she began without preamble, I've read your file. Frankly, I'm stunned. Most people in your position show up with tissues and confusion. You came with timelines, audio files, and a notarized chain of fraud. I'm not used to seeing cases wrapped this neatly. I gave a tight smile. I've been a teacher for 40 years, Detective. I know how to prepare a lesson plan. This one just took a little longer. She smirked. Let's begin then. Over the next hour, we went through every document, every transfer, every lie. Detective Monroe didn't flinch. She didn't pity me either, which I appreciated. Pity was useless. But resolve? That I could use. I'm going to request a full financial forensics team, she said, tapping her pen. We'll start the process to freeze all known accounts associated with your son. If we move quickly, we can stop him before he liquidates anything else. And the house? I asked. We'll place an injunction on the property. If he tries to sell or refinance, it'll get flagged. I nodded, heart pounding. Mrs. Price, she added, eyes softer now, I need to ask, are you willing to press formal charges? Once we do, this goes public. Your family's name, your son's name, it'll all be out there. I looked down at my hands, once strong enough to carry Brian on my hip through grocery lines and hospital visits. Now, they trembled not from weakness but from resolve. He put me in a home to die quietly, I said, but I didn't. So yes, Detective, press the charges. That night, I lay in bed thinking about Brian as a child. How strange it is, the mind of a mother, even after betrayal, even after being discarded like an old coat, your thoughts still wander back to small hands and soft voices. I remembered the first time Brian caught a firefly in the backyard. He'd cupped it gently, then let it go, whispering, "Be free." The irony wasn't lost on me. The child who once freed fireflies now tried to cage his mother. I pulled the blanket up to my chin and closed my eyes. Tomorrow, I would meet with my lawyer and Susan again. We'd plan the next steps. Freezing the accounts was just the beginning. The restraining order, the court petition to reclaim the deed, the public confrontation, it was all coming, and I'd be ready. But for now, in the silence of that tiny beige room, I let myself remember just for a moment, not because I missed the boy he once was, but because I needed to honor the woman I had been, the mother who gave everything. Even now, my heart hurt, but not from sorrow, from release. I was finally letting go. Your son has systematically exploited his position of trust to defraud you of substantial assets, Detective Monroe said, her voice as sharp as the fluorescent lights above her desk. I nodded silently. Words like exploited, defrauded, and substantial no longer shocked me. They'd become the language of my reality. What struck me now was the weight of the next decision, the choice to turn against my own child, not in anger, but in defense of myself. Detective Monroe leaned forward. "We can go 2 routes here, Mrs. Price. First, we press criminal charges, fraud, embezzlement, elder abuse. These are serious, and if convicted, your son could face up to 10 years in prison, maybe more depending on how the DA pursues it." I swallowed, my throat dry. "And the other option?" "A civil suit. We can sue for the return of your assets and punitive damages, but it'll take longer. He'll likely try to stall, and he won't face jail time unless it overlaps with criminal findings." "And can we do both?" Her smile was thin. "With your documentation?" "Absolutely. In fact, I recommend it. The civil case strengthens the criminal one. You're lucky. Most victims don't have a quarter of what you've got." I nodded again. Lucky. If this was luck, I'd hate to see what counted as misfortune. "Could he go to jail?" I asked. "Yes," she said simply, "and frankly, he should." Her certainty made my breath catch. I didn't expect it to feel comforting. There was something deeply unsettling about watching your child turn into someone else, something darker, something dangerous. But there was also a strange relief when someone finally said it out loud, that I wasn't imagining it, that I wasn't just a bitter old woman with a bruised ego. Brian had done wrong. He had hurt me. He had taken what was mine and discarded me like a worn-out rug, and there would be consequences. "What happens next?" Detective Monroe tapped the file with a manicured nail. "That depends on what you want, Mrs. Price. We can move fast, have his assets frozen, and notify him of the charges by next week. Or we can build slowly, let him think he's safe while we trace everything." I looked down at the leather purse in my lap. Inside it, a letter I hadn't dared to open yet. A letter from Brian I'd found tucked into the final stack of moving paperwork weeks ago. It was short, a single sentence scrawled in his hurried handwriting. "Don't ruin this for us, Mom. Just do your part." I folded my hands. "No more waiting," I said. "Do it by the book, but do it. I want him to see it coming, and I want him to know it was me who lit the match." Detective Monroe nodded slowly. "Then we'll begin with a restraining order and account freezes. By the time we're done, he won't be able to buy a cup of coffee without it bouncing back." I sat straighter. Good. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming control, and I was done letting Brian write the story. Over the next 2 weeks, I settled into a routine at Sunny Pines. The staff still thought I was a model resident. I smiled, joined knitting circles, helped others with crossword puzzles. No one knew that every day at 2 p.m., while the other residents dozed off in the recreation room, I slipped out through the side gate, met Harold Benson or Detective Monroe, and worked tirelessly to rebuild the walls Brian had torn down. I reviewed statements, flagged suspicious transactions, signed affidavits, and recorded a formal deposition. It wasn't just a case anymore. It was a mission, and every day I grew stronger. My voice, once tentative and tired, had returned. My steps, once heavy with guilt, grew lighter with purpose. What he didn't know was that every day when I went for my afternoon walk, I was meeting with the detective, my lawyer, or Susan. Brian hadn't called once since dumping me at Sunny Pines. That, in itself, told me everything I needed to know. He didn't even pretend to care. The silence confirmed the truth I had resisted for years. He'd only ever loved what I could give him, not who I was. We found evidence that Brian had been planning this for at least 3 years. It started with quiet additions to his name on my bank documents, for emergency purposes. Then he convinced me to let him manage the property taxes. "Less for you to worry about, Mom." Then came the lawyers, the rushed signatures, the "don't worry about the details, just trust me" speeches. The deeper we dug, the clearer it became. Brian hadn't made a mistake. He had made a plan, and now I was about to destroy it. The most painful discovery came when Harold Benson found a series of text messages Brian had sent to Ashley the day before my move. He read them to me slowly, carefully, as if softening the blow would somehow change the meaning. Finally getting rid of the old lady tomorrow. House should sell for at least $600,000. We can pay off the cards, finish the basement, maybe even get that boat you wanted. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just listened. And then came Rebecca's reply, casual, cruel, and cold. Thank God! If I had to sit through one more of her boring birthday dinners, I'd scream. Just make sure she doesn't make a scene tomorrow. Those words floated in the silence like acid, eating away at the memory of every birthday cake I'd baked with care, every party I'd planned with little paper streamers, every tiny gesture I'd thought was appreciated. I had spent my life giving my time, giving my energy, giving my home, giving my heart, and in return, I had become a burden, a joke, a problem to be gotten rid of. I read those messages sitting in Harold Benson's office, my hands perfectly steady. Susan cried when she saw them. She reached across the table, trying to touch my arm, but I pulled gently away. I didn't need comfort. Not now. I needed resolve. Brian's betrayal didn't hurt because I didn't expect it. It hurt because I had always expected it and kept hoping I was wrong. Harold Benson looked at me, his voice low. We have everything we need. I nodded slowly. Then we moved to Phase 2. Phase 2 began with a call to my grandson, Lucas, Brian's oldest, now 19. He was away at college, the same university Brian always boasted he was paying for, though I had known for some time that every tuition check had come from my own depleted retirement account. Grandma? Lucas sounded surprised. His voice still had the softness of a boy, but with the maturity of a young man learning hard truths. Is everything okay? Are you safe? I'm fine, sweetheart, I said, but I need to talk to you about something important, something your father hasn't been honest about. There was a pause, hesitation. The space where a son weighs his loyalty to a father against the love of a grandmother who had always been there for him. Dad said you were confused lately, that you thought you'd been paying for my school. I sighed. Lucas, I'm going to send you some documents, bank records, letters. I just want you to look. Then you decide what to believe. He was quiet for a long time. I will, he said finally. And Grandma, I love you. I love you too, Lucas, no matter what happens. That evening, my phone rang. Lucas's voice was different this time, tighter, angrier. Is it all true? He asked. Yes. All of it? The accounts? The house? The way they put you in that place? Yes. He let out a shaky breath. Then I'm coming to get you. No, sweetheart, I said gently. That's not what I need from you. Then what do you need? I need you to come home tomorrow night, 6 o'clock. Bring your sister. There's something important you both need to see. Is it going to be bad? I hesitated. It's going to be necessary. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the small twin bed in my tiny room at Sunny Pines, staring at the ceiling. The shadows, cast by the hallway lights, formed patterns like tree branches, reminding me of my old backyard, of the swing Brian used to play on, of lazy summer days before the bitterness settled in. Was it always going to end like this? Was I foolish to think I could love someone enough to keep them from becoming cruel? Or maybe that was the real problem. I had taught Brian how to succeed, but I had never taught him how to respect. And now it was too late to teach. It was time to show. That evening, my phone rang. Lucas's voice was tight with anger. Is it all true? He demanded. Did Dad really steal your money and dump you in that place? Yes, I answered simply, letting the truth settle like stone. I'll come get you. No, I said, my tone resolute. That's not what I need. What then? His voice cracked, a mix of confusion and frustration. I need you and your sister to come to your parents' house tomorrow night. 6 o'clock. Don't tell them I called. Just say you're picking up Emily's things. You both need to be there for what's coming. There was a long silence. What are you going to do? He finally asked. I'm going to teach your father the lesson I should have taught him 30 years ago, I replied, that everything in this world has a price. After hanging up, I called Detective Karen Monroe. We're ready, I said. Tomorrow at 6? Everything must happen in front of his children. Detective Monroe, sharp, confident, and fiercely committed to protecting the vulnerable, had been following my case for weeks. She didn't hesitate. Understood. 2 plainclothes officers will accompany me. We'll stay nearby and intervene only if needed. And your lawyer? Harold Benson will meet us there with the papers. I want everything to be formal. I want him to know I didn't just take this to court. I took it personally. Monroe paused, her tone softening. Are you sure you want to go through with this, Eleanor? I've never been more certain of anything in my life. That night, I sat by the small window in my room at Sunny Pines, watching the moonlight spill across the parking lot. I thought back to the moment it all shifted. It hadn't been the text messages, not the bank statements, not even the moment I saw my belongings on the curb. It had been Rebecca's wave, that smug little wave from inside their SUV, like she was flicking away a leaf from her window. That was when I knew. They never loved me. They only needed me, until they thought they didn't. But tomorrow, I'd make them see just how wrong they were. The morning arrived with sterile routines, clattering pill carts, and the cloying scent of oatmeal and bleach. But I felt like a queen preparing for battle. I bathed, dressed in my finest dark blue dress, the one I'd once worn to a school board hearing when fighting for music funding at Bryan's middle school. I added my pearls, gifted by my late sister, Susan. I packed my documents, stacked neatly in the same wooden box that once held Bryan's baby teeth and report cards, fitting, somehow, the past and the present, finally converging. Mrs. Chambers, the head of the facility, passed me in the hallway. You look wonderful today, Mrs. Price. Special plans. My son invited me for dinner, I said, smiling thinly. She nodded approvingly. Family time is so precious. I said nothing. At 3 p.m. sharp, Detective Monroe arrived in a discreet sedan. Beside her were Officers Harold Bensonez and Lutz, both dressed in plain slacks and jackets. We drove first to the courthouse where I signed my final affidavits. Then we met Harold Benson at his law office. He handed me the documents with a somber nod. Restraining order, power of attorney revocation, asset freeze filings, and a temporary hold on the house deed, he said. We're fully armed. Good, I said. Now let's finish this. As the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the tidy front yard of the house I once called home, I stood at the doorstep. Behind me, Harold and Detective Monroe flanked my sides. Across the street, Susan sat in her car, clutching her rosary, not out of religious obligation, but sheer nerves. To my left, Lucas and Emily approached slowly. Emily clutched a small backpack, as instructed. Lucas gave me a nod. He didn't smile. This wasn't a reunion. This was reckoning. I rang the doorbell. The chime echoed inside. Footsteps. Then the door swung open. Bryan stood there, beer in hand, brow furrowing. Mom, he blinked once. What are you doing here? I came to visit, I said, and I brought some guests. He glanced over my shoulder, and recognition flickered. His eyes narrowed. Detective Monroe, this isn't a good time. I'm afraid we'll have to make time, she interrupted, flashing her badge. We have business to discuss. Rebecca's voice floated from the kitchen. Bryan, who is it? When she appeared in the hallway, she froze. Her face drained of color. Eleanor! Her tone turned brittle. You should have called first. I wanted to surprise you, she gave a weak smile. Always so dramatic. I stepped forward. Let's sit. Bryan bristled, but stepped aside. Everyone followed silently into the dining room. The table had changed. No more floral runner. My photos gone. A sleek glass vase sat at the center, cold, empty, like the people who lived here now. Bryan stood, arms folded, trying to regain control. All right, Say whatever you came to say. The kids don't need to hear family drama. That's where you're wrong, I said, voice steel. They need to hear every word. Lucas and Emily sat at the far end of the table, pale and stiff. I turned to Harold. Please begin. He opened his briefcase and laid out the documents in deliberate order. Brian Price, you are formally being served with the following: a restraining order filed by your mother, revocation of power of attorney, a freeze on accounts suspected to contain misappropriated funds, and evidence of property fraud. Brian blinked. Ashley gasped. You can't be serious. Oh, I am, I said. And so is the district attorney. Detective Monroe stepped forward. We also have grounds to pursue criminal charges. Brian's eyes darted to his children, then to me. You're doing this in front of them? You did it to yourself, in front of me. He slammed his fist on the table. You bitter old woman, after everything I did for you. I stood. No, Brian, after everything I did for you, and you tried to erase me. I stood there, hands trembling, not with fear, but with a lifetime of fury barely held in check. My voice didn't rise, but each word landed like a hammer. You think I'm bitter, Brian? Number, I'm done. I'm done being used, ignored, and betrayed by the very son I sacrificed my life for. Rebecca's eyes darted from me to the documents spread out on the table. Her breath hitched. This can't be happening, she whispered. Oh, it's happening, Harold said, his voice like ice. We have every transaction, every forged signature, every text message. And don't worry, Mrs. Price, your name is in there too. Her face blanched. I didn't know what he was doing, she stammered. I thought... You thought I was too old to notice, I cut in. Too tired, too grateful to question, but you made one mistake, Rebecca. You forgot that I was the woman who raised a child on her own, paid off a house by cleaning offices at night, and taught high school algebra until my joints screamed. Brian's facade was beginning to crack. You think I wanted this, he shouted. I was drowning, Mom. The business was falling apart, the bills, the mortgage. So you threw me out of my own home, I snapped. You watched as movers dumped my life on the curb, on my birthday, Brian, the day you were born. Lucas stood. Is it true? He asked quietly, his face unreadable. Brian blinked. Son, is it true? Lucas repeated, louder this time. Brian opened his mouth, then closed it. Ashley turned to Emily, who was now openly crying. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear, I didn't know he'd take it that far. But Emily backed away from her. You were there. You waved at her from the car. You smiled like it was nothing, Brian finally snapped. You want the truth? Fine. Yes. I used her. We both did. We needed the money, but don't pretend like you didn't benefit, Rebecca. New kitchen? That Nordstrom card? That cruise last year? Where do you think it came from? Rebecca's jaw dropped. You said it was a bonus. You knew, I said coldly. You just didn't want to know. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, full of things that would never be repaired. Then I took a deep breath and reached into my purse, pulling out one last document, the deed to the house. This house, I said, placing it on the table. It was never yours. That transfer? Nullified. Fraudulent. The courts have agreed. It's being returned to me, effective today. Brian staggered back like I had slapped him. You can't? Oh, but I can, I said. And I did. I'll contest it, he spat. Good luck with that, Harold replied, folding his arms. Every inch of your scam is documented. You'd be lucky to get a cot at the homeless shelter once the dust settles. Brian crumpled into the chair, head in his hands, muttering to himself. Ashley looked like a ghost, but I didn't feel pity, just clarity. I turned to my grandchildren. Lucas, Emily, you didn't do this, but now you know what he is, what she is. I won't ask you to take sides, but I will ask you this. Don't let anyone ever make you question your worth. Emily ran to me, hugging me fiercely. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I didn't know. I know you didn't, sweetheart. Lucas stood beside her, jaw clenched, his eyes full of tears he refused to shed. We'll help you move back in, whatever you need. I smiled for the first time that evening. I don't think I'll be moving back in, dear. That house carries too many ghosts. But thank you. Turned to Brian one last time. He looked up, hollow and defeated. Please, he whispered. Mom, I'm your son. I stepped forward. You were. Once. Then I turned and walked out. Outside, the air was cool and clean. I exhaled like I hadn't in years. Detective Monroe gave me a nod. It's done, she said. No, I replied. It started. She smiled. Would you like a ride home? No, I said. Susan's waiting. Across the street, my oldest friend stepped out of her car, arms open, and for the first time in decades, I walked towards someone not needing anything, not money, not help, not approval, just peace. I walked arm in arm with Susan to her car, her silence more comforting than any words. As we drove away from the house that once held my dreams and later my betrayal, I felt no sadness, only closure. Susan glanced at me as we turned the corner. You okay? I looked out the window, watching the world roll by like a long-forgotten song. For the first time in years, I think I am. We rode the rest of the way in peaceful quiet. No more arguments, no more secrets, no more pretending, just the hum of the engine and the beat of a heart that had rediscovered its own rhythm. Back at Susan's house, we sat on the porch, watching the sun melt into the trees. I never wanted revenge, I said softly. Just peace, just enough room to breathe. You got more than that, Susan replied. You got your name, your power, your dignity back. I smiled. Maybe that's what this birthday was always meant to be. Not a celebration of years gone, but a rebirth. She reached over and placed her hand on mine. Happy birthday, Eleanor. A week later, I moved into a quiet one-bedroom apartment not far from where I'd spent most of my working life. It wasn't grand. No hardwood floors, no bay windows, but it had warm sunlight in the morning and birdsong through the afternoon, and it was mine. No one could take it. I started volunteering at the local library on Tuesdays and Fridays. The children's section became my favorite. Something about the way they stared wide-eyed at the world reminded me that hope is a renewable resource. Lucas visited weekly, always bringing groceries or just sitting quietly while I told him stories of his father when he was a boy. Emily called every night at 8 p.m., her voice filled with tenderness and apology. We never discussed Brian unless she brought it up. 2 months later, Ashley left town quietly. No apologies, no explanations. Brian's trial moved forward. He took a plea deal, 2 years in a minimum security facility, 5 years probation, restitution payments when possible. I didn't attend the sentencing. I didn't need to. The gavel of consequence had already fallen in my heart. 1 year later. On my 61st birthday, I sat on my apartment balcony, sipping tea and watching the world go by. A soft knock at the door startled me. It was Lucas, holding a small package. From Emily and me, he said. She picked it. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a silver bracelet with a phoenix charm and a tiny inscription, still rising. Tears welled in my eyes, but not from sorrow, from joy, from release, from finally choosing me. Sometimes, family isn't defined by blood, but by the choices we make when love turns to obligation, and obligation turns to chains. I gave my son everything, but in the end, I had to give myself something more important, freedom. So if you're watching this and wondering if it's too late to take your life back, let me be the one to tell you. It's not. You're not too old. You're not too broken. You're not invisible. You're still here. And like the phoenix, you can rise. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below, share it with someone who needs strength today, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories like this one. Until next time, take care of your heart. It's never too late to start again. Love.